The silence of the bars is broken by the sound of pages turning. Letícia walks down the narrow corridor of the prison, holding a book as if it were a shield. On the other side, Gabriel watches everything, cold eyes of someone who's never lost a case or a feeling. Their meeting seems unlikely. She, marked by pain and a longing to protect those no one sees. He, driven by profit, determined to shut this place down without looking back. But when Letícia faces Gabriel for the first time, there's a tension in the air. She doesn't flinch under his skeptical gaze and challenges him. Have you ever wondered who's really on trial here? For a second, Gabriel falters. In that moment, a dangerous spark is born between her world, built on hope and open wounds, and his, all rules and distance. Who'll give in first? And how far can this confrontation go, when each holds a secret that could change everything? Keep watching and find out. Among letters and silences, can love break through all barriers? The gate creaks so loud it's like it wants to announce to everyone that someone from outside is coming in. The corridor smells of bleach mixed with stale coffee and a trace of cheap perfume. The sound of keys jingling is almost like music, but not a good kind. Letícia already knows every step along this cold concrete path. She drags a box of books bumped against her hip, tucks her hair behind her ear, and tries not to think about all the eyes behind the bars watching, hoping for some relief between these colorless walls. Her hands shake a little, as they always do when she's about to start something new here. Books stacked up, battered covers. She can't help but smile when she sees a title that used to be Anna's favorite, The Inmate Who Never Read Anything, until one day. Now Letícia goes over the names of the women in her head, trying to guess which one would like the fantasy without a cover or the romance with stained pages. She doesn't even notice time passing or the chills sneaking in through the cracked windows. And then, footsteps. Not just any footsteps. Not rushed or dragging. They approach with purpose, like someone stepping into a place that already belongs to them, even though they haven't been there before. Gabriel Mora appears in the corridor, dark suit, sober tie, and that stare that sticks to every detail. He's the type who scrutinizes, who judges, who wants to see everything and everyone before saying or doing anything. The nurse's white coat brushes past him, but he doesn't break stride. He knows where he's going. Maybe he doesn't even want to be there, but he makes himself. Letícia feels the air change. She doesn't need to look to know. Someone important just walked in. Not important because of a title, but because he carries that superior air, almost like a wall. She senses him before she sees him. And when she does, everything seems clearer and heavier. His eyes scan past her quickly, but linger a fraction longer than necessary. An eyebrow raised, an almost smile at the edge of his mouth. There's no outright arrogance, just the icy confidence of someone who's already decided he's not blending in with this world. She wants to shrink away, but doesn't. Straightens her back, grips the weight of the books tighter, as if she's found some reason to stand tall right there. Gabriel stops, just an instant, on the opposite side of the corridor. The space gets stuck between the two. No words, just the silent clash of differences. He, suited up and gleaming in all this grime. She, discreet, tired in the eyes, but with an almost invisible energy, hard to explain. Letícia holds her breath. Does he notice the ink-stained hands, a memory from the recommendation cards she likes to write for the inmates? She imagines what he's thinking. Maybe he pities her. Maybe he finds it all sentimental. She almost feels angry at him, but it's more the urge to defy. To tell him, and anyone from the outside, that in here, there's life, there's pain, and there's hope. Gabriel pulls a sheet from his pocket, checks some scribbles, then glances at his watch like it's all just time and tasks. He doesn't recognize her at first, but notices how she stands. He still doesn't get what all these books are for, or why someone would bother bringing culture to people who, in his mind, maybe don't deserve it. But he doesn't look away. Their eyes meet. It's not a stare down. It's coldly curious. She feels that he wants to figure her out, but doesn't know where to start. The silence thickens. An inmate pushes the cleaning cart past them, leaning over to peek at the box of books. The sweet scent of fabric softener tries to blend into the air, but doesn't take hold. Letícia takes the chance to break free from his gaze. She fixates on the battered spine of a Machado de Assis, just for relief. But inside, her heart's racing, as if she's been caught in a lie. She doesn't want to be invisible, but sometimes it hurts to be seen. Gabriel watches Letícia like she's something out of place. He's there to work, close deals, expose failures, and crunch numbers. He doesn't understand why this bothers him. Why did someone choose a place like this? He figures there's got to be some broken story behind it, but he won't let himself ask. Focus on the process, the documents. Emotions just get in the way. She feels every unspoken judgment, as if he said out loud exactly what he thinks of her and everyone here. But at the same time, there's something beyond the scorn. A masked respect, an almost involuntary interest in her gentle way. His eyes flick back to her, too quickly to be normal, as if checking that she's still there, and she is, steady, fighting the urge to protect herself. Letícia licks her lips unconsciously. The corridor's chill brushes her exposed arm. She pulls her coat tighter and tucks a strand of hair behind her ear, just to do something, not wanting to look insecure. 1,000 thoughts flood her mind. Does he understand the weight of the stories in each book? Has he ever loved someone on this side of the bars? A police officer's radio crackles, calling over the intercom. Gabriel turns away, but not before catching the way Letícia looks at him. Without fear, not openly defiant, but with the air of someone who knows what she's carrying. He wonders if she reads reports the way she reads books, if she cries quietly over injustice, if she's ever lost someone. Letícia, on the other hand, senses everything left unsaid. His arrogance doesn't scare her as much as she thought it would. Maybe it's just armor. Maybe, behind the stern posture and guarded speech, there's a man as tired as she is, just for different reasons. The corridor swallows them both in silence again. He moves on. She adjusts the box and finishes arranging the makeshift shelf, but the atmosphere has changed. Now, every time she hears the sound of leather shoes on that cold floor, she'll remember this first look. And he, even if he won't admit it, will find his thoughts drifting back to her, trying to understand how so much gentleness can exist where there should only be scarcity. Right there, in that corridor where no one's supposed to notice anyone, something invisible has already shifted. And they both know, in a way that can't be put into words, that from this moment on, neither of them will leave this place the same. The prison's meeting room was never a welcoming place. No smell of coffee, no open windows, just stale, humid air, as if even time was afraid to circulate inside. The walls were a weird shade of beige, old mold stains in the corners, and the chairs creaked quietly every time someone moved. That early afternoon, there was more silence than conversation. A heavy silence that pressed on your chest, because everyone there seemed to carry a difficult story. Letícia stayed in a corner, almost invisible, but her gaze was steady. She knew what this meeting meant. The warden was there, sharp-eyed lawyers, papers in hand, and him, Gabriel, with his expensive suit that didn't fit this dusty backwater place at all. He had that way about him of someone who already knows the answers, the numbers, the laws. He spoke first, straight to the point, his cold eyes sweeping the room like headlights on an empty road. He showed graphs, reports, accusations, pointed out security failures, lack of medical attention, skipping names, and calling everything a case, or a process. For Gabriel, every woman in there was just a faceless entry on a ledger. As Gabriel talked, the others seemed to shrink into their seats. Nervous murmurs rippled when he mentioned budget cuts, transfers, even temporary closure. His solutions were quick, efficient, never hesitant. For him, it was all logic, contracts, calculated risk. It was like he didn't see people at all, just the paper in front of him. Letícia felt her palms sweating. A quiet anger grew inside, along with the duty she'd always felt. Not to let anyone be erased so easily, not to let others' pain be ignored as they once did with her brother. No one looked her way. But when Gabriel finished and was already preparing for another round of icy justifications, Letícia stood up. The chair's scrape was a small shock, but enough to make everyone notice. She was short, but in that moment, she seemed taller. She didn't need to look at notes, didn't rehearse a speech. She just spoke. I get these reports. They reveal a lot. But there are things the papers don't say. Her voice came out strong and clear, no tremor. Gabriel sat completely still for a second, staring at Letícia, unsure if she was just another staff member. She took a deep breath and went on, fiddling with the rings on her finger without realizing. When Anna cried because she didn't get any news from her daughter, it didn't show up in statistics. When Donatsia fainted every time she saw a police officer out of terror, that's not here. Bianca, pregnant, spent nights without sleep and pain. No one wrote it down. The books that went missing from the library didn't go missing out of neglect. It's because they were used as pillows, as hope. Because inside here, nobody makes a scene. People just learn to go quiet. And honestly, the silence hurts more than the shouting ever could. She looked at him directly. It was quick, unflinching, but not hateful, just wanting to be heard. He held her gaze, tense, didn't look away, though his hands trembled a bit under the table. The warden tried to shift the subject, but Gabriel raised his hand, asked Letícia to go on. The whole room held their breath. She spoke slowly, as if flipping through a family album. Stories of the women there, loves left behind, unanswered letters, longing, fear. Spoke of how most of them wanted only a second chance, a little dignity. Gabriel tried to counter, brought up laws, responsibilities, costs. His voice was careful, emotionless. But every time he spoke, Letícia answered with something impossible to rebut. Some detail of pain, some memory, a sliver of happiness that no one outside would ever notice. Deep down, he wondered, how can someone care so much about people the world's already forgotten? He tried to keep up his image, but you could see in his eyes that she was really testing him. Maybe for the first time since he'd left law school. Letícia felt her chest tight, but also that thrill of challenge, as if the whole world depended on convincing that man. It wasn't just for the inmates. It was for her brother, for every time someone tried to silence her along with him. She kept pushing, even seeing defeat etched on her colleagues' faces. There was no anger shining in her voice, no pride. Just a kind of painful honesty from someone who's been beaten up by life and still believes things can change. In the end, silence returned. But it was different now. No longer a silence of fear, of people waiting for punishment, but one of impact. Everyone understood that something had shifted. From then on, it was impossible to pretend these were just numbers. Letícia had given every suffering a name and a face. Gabriel stood, straightened his tie, thanked them politely. For a second, he stood there, facing Letícia as if trying to decipher what he felt. Something hurt inside, even if he'd never admit it. He asked himself, almost forcibly, what did I lose along the way to become someone this logical? Letícia stood up too, still trembling a bit, but her eyes never lowered. He left, and, before closing the door, looked back. For the first time, his eyes seemed to ask something. And Letícia felt that, somehow, she'd done it. That now he knew. Here, among cold walls and scarce hope, there were real people waiting for something far greater than a sentence. Early that afternoon, the makeshift library was empty, just Letícia among uneven shelves and the smell of worn paper. It was a cramped corner, but a place where she felt the world lighter, or at least, less heavy. The silence there was something else, filled with voices from the past. She was shelving books, lining up titles no one wanted, when she felt her shoulders sag again. Grief always came like that, suddenly, like a cold draft through a window left ajar. At that moment, the door creaked. The sound was soft, but in that place even the tiniest noise could feel momentous. Gabriel Mora appeared in the doorway. He had that way about him, never asking permission, just entering, with his suit much too bright for all this gray, and a look that said he never expects to be surprised. He scanned the room quickly, analytical, as if figuring out the square footage and calculating costs. But he stayed there, a second longer than any rational man would. Letícia said nothing, just looked up, and in that gesture was almost a question, "What are you doing here?" But she only gave him a small, courteous smile, waiting for his reason. He waited too, as if unsure where to start. Gabriel wasn't the type for small talk in quiet places. He wandered to the shelf, flipped through a copy of Machado de Assis, almost pretending to care. I was curious. His voice was neutral, but not harsh. I wanted to understand what a librarian does in a place like this. Letícia wanted to say she asked herself that every night, but didn't. She just felt her heart quicken, so she busied herself with a book, not wanting to show it. I just try to give a little hope. Sometimes, having a book in hand changes everything. Even if it's just for a few pages, she replied quietly, almost as a secret. Gabriel looked at her. It was different from the harsh stare he'd given in the meeting before. Now, he noticed the details. Her hastily tied hair, the way she adjusted her coat on her shoulders. He probably thought it was all a waste. Her, here, in all of this nothing. He asked, maybe more to himself, do you really think it helps? That these books make a difference? Letícia hesitated, but didn't run from it. My mom used to read to fall asleep since I can remember. When I lost my brother, it was the only thing that kept me breathing. Sometimes, people in here need, more than anyone, to remember that another world is possible. For a moment, neither said anything. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence where, by accident, you catch a glimpse of something in the other you never imagined. Gabriel noticed the pause, the small tremor in her voice when she mentioned her brother, but pretended not to. His hands, steady until now, gripped the book harder. Letícia wanted to ask about his family, to pierce that shell, but held back. She knew when someone needed a moment's breath before letting down their guard. Gabriel glanced out the small window, taking in the bars around the yard. It was like he was searching for an answer out there. It must be hard. You seem so light, even when carrying so much. She didn't know what to say. No one ever talked to her that way. Not in that tone, not with that care. It happens, she whispered. Some days I almost give up. Almost. But then I remember him. My brother used to say justice is like a good story. Even when it seems all is lost, there's always someone willing to keep going. That's why I stay. Gabriel let out a short sigh. For the first time, something slipped from his mask. I never thought justice could be about beauty. In my job, it's just rules, paperwork, contracts, and a lot of noise. Looking at these women, at you, it's different. Letícia smiled, a knowing smile. She stepped closer, just a little, and picked up a Clarice Lispector, as if offering a gift. Held it out to him, without pressure or expectation. Want to try? Some books change us more than we think. Sometimes even tough lawyers, she joked, with a sweetness she didn't know still lived in her. Gabriel took the book carefully, as if afraid to break it. Their fingers brushed accidentally, a bit awkward. A quick touch, but it lingered in every cell, like holding your breath just to feel it a moment more. He looked down, but didn't let go of the book. It's been ages since I read anything that wasn't a case file or a report. But I'll try. Light from the late afternoon cut through the window, turning dust in the air to gold. It was a calm moment, almost beautiful, even in this harsh world of iron, walls, and mistrust. Letícia went back to organizing the books, a bit slower now, just to hold on to his presence a while longer. Gabriel hesitated, like he wanted to say something else, but chose silence. He wandered the room, footsteps barely making a sound, stopping at a reading poster made by one of the inmates. He read aloud, softly, surprised. An open book is a free heart. She noticed the phrase hit him. For the first time, it felt like something in him had begun to change. In the end, before leaving, Gabriel looked at her again. His eyes said thank you, even if his mouth didn't. After he left, the place was quieter than ever. But it wasn't lonely silence anymore. It was the kind that contains hope. It was the third rainy night in a row in that small town. Outside, only the thunder rumbling through the mountains could be heard, sometimes so loud it seemed the whole world would collapse. The wind cut through, rattling the windows of the plain hotel where Gabriel shut himself in every night to work alone. All he could see were papers and files, but it was impossible to ignore the musty smell, the cold seeping down the walls, the damp carpet sinking underfoot. The kind of hotel you choose only when there's no alternative, and for him, here, there wasn't. At the desk, the dim lamp was never quite enough. The silence was so thick that any noise from the street sounded like a shout. A truck passing slow, a lone horn, a dog whining at the rain. Gabriel never liked silence. Thought it was a waste. His Sao Paulo office was always alive. People talking, phones ringing, coffee machines whirring, hurried footsteps. Nothing like that here. Just him, marked up sheets, and that sense that time had stopped. A tight, inexplicable restlessness that came with the stench of wet paper and old cigarettes. Now and then, without meaning to, he'd check his phone, waiting for a message. But from whom? No one to send one. Letitia's name kept blinking at the bottom of his mind, like he might call just to ask, "Are you okay? Did you sleep?" Which made no sense at all. He wasn't that type. Never was the guy who checked up on people. But that night, his hand paused on the page. He remembered, unintentionally, how she wore her hair up, the simple wrinkled blouse, her whole look, and all the hidden pieces as well. Gabriel wondered what she was doing right now. Pictured Letícia walking those prison corridors, footsteps muffled by rubber soles, the ghosts of other nights keeping her company. She was probably caring for the inmates, delivering a borrowed book, a kind word. But did she get scared there? Did she, in the dark, sometimes cry where no one could see, the way she'd whispered to him, just once? He shook it off and returned to his spreadsheets, multiplying figures, dividing land, sorting cold arguments into a dry petition. But the numbers didn't make any sense anymore. He tried recalling the phrase Letícia had said, something about hope, about not giving up on people, no matter the pain. Funny how it kept echoing. Gabriel wanted to believe it was just exhaustion. But the image, Letícia in the makeshift library, gentle hands selecting books, her eyes fighting not to be lost in the past, kept coming up between one clap of thunder and the next. By nearly midnight, the hotel seemed strange, like the furniture might have shifted. Sleep never came, no matter how hard he tried. His heart pounded, restless, a longing for something that had never been. He missed hearing her voice, the way she linked every inmate's story to some small dream. A child, a letter, a simple request for forgiveness. The silence lodged in his throat. Gabriel would never admit it, but he wished he were in the prison just to see if she'd smile at him again. That half-shy, half-conspiratorial smile. He wanted to ask about her brother, to ache with her, to offer something more than forms and contracts. But he didn't even know how to start. Meanwhile, across town, Letícia wandered the damp corridors, carrying an old blanket, a pot of tea, and 3 nearly worn-out Clarice Lispector novels. The prison was noisier than usual after dark, rain pounding the tin roof, a stubborn drip near the guards' room, and, behind the bars, a few nervous voices. There, fear never slept. Especially tonight. Someone claimed they'd heard too many crashes, too many outside noises, like the world was collapsing. Letícia was used to navigating the whispers of the midnight shift. One inmate locked in her own tears, another quietly pleading to have someone tell her family she was all right. Letícia took their hands, gave awkward hugs, passed a mug of lukewarm tea from hand to hand. She smiled at each one, softly, asking if they wanted a peaceful night, even knowing peace in there didn't last long. Deep down, that's what she wanted, too. Just a few seconds of calm, an evening without bad memories, an embrace that would let her chest stop aching. When she came back to her little library room, she stopped at the window just to watch the rain running down the glass. The prison street had only a single lamppost, shaking in the wind. She stared into the darkness, clutching a book to her chest. She thought about Gabriel. Had no idea why, but she did. Remembered how he talked fast, impatient, as if words burned his tongue. But there was something else, the silence between them when their eyes met. Neither of them was any good at real talk, but they didn't need to be. One look was enough. In that silence, Letícia felt more questions than answers. Did he really see the people here, or just the numbers? Did he, even for a second, want to be someone different? The rain picked up, and so did the exhaustion. Letícia took a sheet of paper and doodled without thinking. She wasn't writing to anyone, but it was as if every word carried the weight of what she'd never said to Gabriel. The fear, the pride, the stubborn hope of being able to trust someone again. She sighed, folded the page into quarters, and put it in her pocket. Thought about calling him. She had no excuse and knew it. But she wanted to ask if he was doing all right, if he was warm, eating well, if he needed someone to calm his heart. But she didn't call. He didn't send any message either. And so, separated by the storm, Letícia and Gabriel sat in silence. A silence that wasn't empty, but packed with everything they felt and couldn't say. And in some strange way, that absence, that ache pressing at their chests, was already the start of something neither of them knew how to name. It was late afternoon, but the sky was already dark, heavy clouds crowding overhead, the kind of weather that even scares the birds away. The rain had let up, just the smell of wet earth drifting in through the windows and mixing with the mold in the corridor. The whole prison seemed to shrink, as if it too were afraid of the night. Silence was even deeper on days like that. Letícia was shelving the books, unhurried. She liked this slow path between faces, each woman with her own way of holding tight to a tiny hope, a poem, a love story, anything to reach beyond the bars. Suddenly, a sharp metallic sound, quick and jarring, hurt her ears. It was just an echo, but enough to know something was wrong. Part of her soul was always on alert, bracing for another blow from the world. She grabbed her phone and hurried to the reading patio. She found Marta, one of the youngest inmates, collapsed on her side, legs trembling, hand clutching her stomach. The others watched from a distance, wearing that familiar look of fear. Get too close, and you'd get scolded. Look away, and guilt crept in. In there, even helping was hesitant. Letícia forgot all the protocols. She knelt on the cold floor, felt her pants damp from the last downpour. Her voice came out gently, but her heart pounded in her chest. Marta, look at me. Try to breathe slowly, okay? Where does it hurt? The girl's eyes were fixed, hair glued to her sweaty forehead. It wasn't just pain, it was hunger, fear, all mixed together. Letícia called for the nurse, but before she could run outside, she heard the heavy steps of the warden coming down the hall. Letícia, what are you doing here? This isn't your job. The warden's irritated voice cut through the air, laced with fear. Take her back to her cell. I'll check on her later. Letícia didn't move. She stayed put, ashamed, angry. She wanted to yell, but only managed. She needs a doctor. The warden hesitated, glanced around. If we call an ambulance, there'll be questions. If this gets out, it's trouble for the prison, for me, for everyone. That's when Gabriel showed up. It wasn't time for meetings, but he'd come by to jot something in the patient file. He had to stop when he saw the scene. Letícia on her knees, hands dirty with dust, the warden agitated, and the inmate nearly fainting. He spoke firmly, almost mechanically, like handing down a ruling in court. What's happening here? His voice was so cold, so formal it would almost be funny, if it weren't such a mess. Letícia stood slowly, wiping her hands on her pants. Their eyes met, hers pleading, almost begging, his, worn out, the look of someone who's seen too much to be easily shaken. Gabriel, we need a doctor now. Marta's not well, Letícia ventured. Gabriel sighed, adjusted his suit jacket. He never seemed comfortable there, everything about the place too tight, from his clothes to his soul. He looked from the warden to Letícia. Everything has rules here, Letícia. You can't just jump into medical cases. You know this. There's a protocol for situations like this. Follow what's written. He was so calm it hurt. The warden clung to that. Exactly. We can't make a fuss for nothing. Letícia bit her lip to stop herself from exploding. She looked at Marta again, who was dragging her fingers along the floor, not understanding anything, just needing someone close. Then Letícia spoke, quietly, but in a way no one forgets. If it were your daughter lying on the ground, would you wait for the protocol too? The silence between them thudded. The warden looked away. Gabriel froze, as if the question had struck before he could defend himself. His eyes hardened, but inside, her words unsettled him more than any complaint. Letícia knew, right then, that maybe she'd gone too far, but she didn't apologize. She just stood there, waiting. Gabriel stepped closer, crouched a little to look at the girl. Up close, she was just a scared, skinny teenager, gasping for air. It was different seeing from here, not from behind a desk, not on paper. For the first time, his voice lost some of that detached edge. Get the infirmary now. We'll talk about this later. Not quite what she'd hoped for, but it was a different tone. The warden left, grumbling, to find the nurse. The hallway was just the two of them and the girl, still trying to open her eyes. Silence returned, dense and heavy. Letícia sat beside the wall, not yet able to get up. Gabriel hovered nearby, uncertain whether he should stay or go. He folded his arms, looked at her with irritation mixed with something that looked a bit like reluctant respect. You don't get it, Letícia. These rules weren't made to protect you or these women. They're to stop us from getting in trouble. Everything's at stake here, even my job. She answered with a tired whisper. I know, but sometimes it feels like the rules only apply to those who've already lost everything. To those who just want a chance to do something different. He was serious, but his gaze had changed. Less judgment, more curiosity. The silence stretched now. For the first time, she realized he wasn't made just out of certainty. And maybe, for that reason, she could never truly hate him. Marta coughed quietly, pulling them back to reality. Gabriel gave Letícia a small nod. Not quite an apology, but maybe something close. You did the right thing. But no, you can't save everyone. Letícia heard what he didn't say. He wasn't talking about Marta. Maybe he was talking about himself. The want, once, to save someone and failing. Or never even trying. When the nurse arrived, the air was still heavy, but it was different. They didn't look at each other anymore, just stood there, each listening to the urgent beating of their own heart, hers pounding with fear of failing, his echoing against everything he thought he knew. The distance between them felt as long as the hallway itself. And in that moment, it was clear to both of them. It wasn't a distance they could ignore anymore. It was a colorless Monday. End of the shift, heavy clouds pouring shadows down the narrow hallway. In there, it never was truly day. The light that slipped through the bars felt tired, almost apologetic for being there. Letícia was gathering the last books, stacking them slowly, listening to the sighs in the walls. That's when the inmate approached, nervous, hunched, clutching a folded note in trembling fingers. No need for words. Letters had become tradition there, but each one weighed like the first. Letícia felt the woman's eyes on her even before she touched her, a mix of hope and shame, always the same. She took the letter. She didn't read it, just closed her fist tight around it, tucking it into her jacket pocket, feeling the paper thrum against her chest like a secret pounding inside. In the makeshift library, nobody else was left. Just her, a few battered volumes, and a silence that couldn't decide if it was comfort or punishment. Time seemed stuck, dragging just so she'd feel every second. Letícia rubbed her face, so tired, not physically, but with a different weight. The kind that seems glued to your skin. That's when she heard footsteps. Gabriel, striding in, always too purposeful for a place like this. Always in a suit, always cold. But this time, something was different. He didn't announce himself, didn't try to be seen. Just watched. Letícia tensed up right away. She knew she was being watched. She didn't need to look to feel it. The letter was still hot against her chest, beating with her racing heart. Gabriel pretended to study the shelves, but his eyes kept coming back to her. First at the books, then at Leticia's hands. The way she guarded her pocket, as if protecting something valuable. He noticed the fake calm, her fingers restless, her eyes darting away, her breath short. His head spun with questions. What was in that letter? Why didn't she read it openly, like she did with the others? What secret was she holding, and why did it look like it hurt? Gabriel never paid much mind to details like this, but she dragged it out of him, that attentive, almost vulnerable side. For the first time, he wanted to understand. Letícia kept her poise, but she was nowhere near hiding the truth. A chill crept up her chest, as if the paper was soaking up all her fears. She wanted to drop everything and run, but at the same time she didn't want to let go of the letter for anything in the world. Gabriel edged closer, stopping less than a meter away. It was hard to explain what happened whenever he got that near. The air seemed to vibrate between them, thick with unspoken words, loaded silences. He cleared his throat, deciding to break an invisible barrier. "Did you get something important?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Letícia kept her eyes down, thumb rolling along the seam of her pocket. Not replying was her defense, silence safer than any answer. But inside, everything trembled, the urge to share the weight, the fear of being invaded, the guilt of hiding something from him. Gabriel didn't prod like a lawyer, more like someone too curious to let things slide. He looked at her as if asking for permission, but Letícia wouldn't yield. Silence became a third presence, pressing in on both of them. He took another step, slowly, meeting her gaze this time. His look was hard, but beneath it was something else, a shy respect, a quiet admiration, and maybe a strange wish to be helpful. Gabriel didn't know why. Why did this woman unsettle him so? Why did he want her to trust him? Inside, Letícia wondered the very same thing. She hadn't trusted anyone since her brother died. Holding secrets was almost instinct, defense, survival. But something in him made her own walls feel weaker. Maybe it was that side of him, hiding his own pain with arrogance. She recognized it. She did the same to protect herself. Down the hall, an inmate called from afar. Gabriel used it to break the tension, but before leaving he glanced at Letícia one more time, as if promising, "I still want to know." She gripped the letter tightly, feeling the paper scratch her palm. She dreaded what Gabriel might ask, feared what she herself might have to admit, if he pressed. The rest of the shift crawled by, each minute weighing heavier. Letícia found a corner and sat with her back to the world. Bad timing to read the letter now. The smell of paper almost screamed of the past. The old twist in her stomach. Fear, hope, longing, guilt. She put it away again. Just touching it hurt, as if her past was waiting to escape. On the other side of the frosted door, Gabriel hovered, about to leave. He saw her curled up in the corner, small, but with a silent strength he'd never seen in anyone else. That woman endured time, pain, prejudice, and now she kept him out too, in a way that only made him want to stay more. Gabriel bit his lip, unsure. He felt ridiculous, that ache in his chest. This wasn't part of his plan. He resented that piece of paper, envied whoever's words she kept so close. He wasn't even sure why. He just wanted to know what was there, who'd written those words that got past Leticia's defenses. Outside, he passed the gate, feeling the cold wind on his face. He looked at his own reflection in the car window. He seemed someone else. Driving back to the hotel, the details kept replaying. Her tense hand, the heavy silence, the pain behind her disguise. For the first time, Gabriel wanted to ask the right questions, but realized the important things aren't asked for, they're earned. And Leticia would never open up to anyone who didn't first make peace with her silence. Night fell darker than ever on that small town, and between Gabriel and Leticia, only uncertainty remained. The weight of what was unspoken. The secret locked in a piece of paper. Two people, each on their own side of the wall, trying not to feel, trying not to give in. But it was getting harder to pretend nothing was changing. The reception smelled of lukewarm coffee and old paint. Leticia was closing up the library early that day, her fingers gritty from the books, following her usual recipe. Silence, a nod to the guard on duty, fast steps through the prison's cold hallway. Outside, night fell quiet, soaked with a drizzle that barely wet the ground, just clung to her skin like low-grade anxiety. Gabriel appeared at the entrance, tie loosened, face lined from too many office calls, eyes lingering longer on her than on his actual assignment. The invitation slipped out awkwardly, as if, "Would you like," wasn't part of his vocabulary. Just dinner, that's all. Nothing more, though the air between them said otherwise. She froze, the library keys turning slowly in her damp palm, sweat prickling her neck. He tried to smile, nervous, hoping she'd say yes as naturally as she breathed around books. But Leticia looked out at the empty street, the prison's high wall, and felt the world squeeze tight, a circle of fears. "I'd rather not mix things." "Sorry, Gabriel, but I'd prefer not to," she said softly, avoiding his eyes. The answer was out faster than she meant. The silence that oozed in after was the worst possible kind of noise. He stood there, arms crossed as if shielding his own heart. A moment before turning away, he looked at Leticia with something like a mute plea. It wasn't anger, just surprise, and a dry sadness that wouldn't fit on his face. The rain thickened as Gabriel walked to his hotel. The wind swept leaves across the ground, the cold deepening with every thought. What exactly was he hoping for, inviting Leticia to dinner? It made no sense, or maybe too much sense, and that's what scared him. He wasn't meant to feel anything here. Step by step, questions crowded in, one after the other, nobody to answer them. When did she stop being just an obstacle in his plans? When did her gaze start bothering him in a way that wasn't irritation, wasn't even surprise? Just the urge to break through that wall he had always built between feeling and reason. The hotel was almost empty. The receptionist yawned with boredom. The lobby TV muttered quietly. Gabriel went up to his room without a word. Messy table, papers scattered, a half-drunk glass of whiskey. His reflection in the window showed someone tired, stubble growing, eyes hollow. He sat on the bed, heavy hands in his lap. He could have called someone, colleagues, his girlfriend in the city, anyone for distraction. He didn't. The only person he wanted to talk to was her. And her refusal hurt more than he liked to admit. That same night, Leticia paced her tiny apartment, the old clock ticking out each thought. Why did I say no? Did I hurt him? She wanted good reasons, wanted to believe she did it to protect the boundaries between them. But deep down it was just fear. Fear of being seen outside the prison's walls, without the shield of books, without the ducked looks from inmates or guards. She sat in the old armchair, the letters still tucked under her books as if the truths inside weighed all on their own. She traced the folded paper, close to her heart. Gabriel crept into her thoughts again. The way he listened, even when he pretended not to care. The way his hands shook just a little when he crossed his arms. She remembered the invitation, his voice shaky, almost asking without asking. She felt guilty, wanted to cry, wanted to go back in time and say yes. The street was quiet. Occasionally a car slid by, headlights glinting on the wet glass. The coffee she'd forgotten in the kitchen had gone bitter but comforting at the same time. Letícia closed her eyes, pressed her forehead to her knees, tried to breathe deep. She thought of her brother, of everything she'd lost, how she kept dodging life outside for fear of getting hurt again. But how could you not get hurt when even at a distance, the wound was already wide open? Gabriel switched off the lamp, the darkness settling in heavy. The quiet wasn't the same as the quiet he shared with her in that narrow prison office. Here it was cold, lonely. Back there, even when they didn't speak, what passed between them was different. Why did it matter so much now? Why her? In the middle of nowhere, when all he wanted was to wrap things up and leave. Or was it really that simple? He had no answers. Just the echo of her no ringing in his head. Hours went by with neither of them sleeping. Letícia listened to the rain on the window, Gabriel, the clock marking each minute. Sometimes they imagined the same thing. If only they'd said something else. One little word, would it have changed everything? He thought about running through the night, knocking on her door, saying all he wanted was to hear her voice. She thought about picking up the phone, calling him and saying, "I'm sorry, I accept, it's okay." Neither moved. Dawn crept in slowly over that corner of the world. For both of them, it was a night when nothing happened, but what lingered there was as sturdy as any wall. The fear of mixing up feelings, the shame in trying, the mystery of waiting on a sign from the other. In the end, Letícia curled up on her couch until sunlight slipped through the cracks. Gabriel walked through the hotel's pale light, trying to remember who he'd been before he saw the shy smile of a woman with sad eyes. Between them, the distance only grew. It wasn't just the city or the prison case. It was what silence built all around them. And even without a word, both understood that the dinner that never happened was the beginning of something neither had a name for yet. From the start that day, something felt off. The sky was heavy, the small town smothered by fog that clung to the prison walls like fear. Nothing extraordinary happened, but Letícia felt it in her chest, before she spilled coffee on her blouse, before the whispers among staff, that a storm was coming. At the gate, extra patrols. Stricter looks. The director's radio was never silent in his hand. When the oversight cars rolled in honking, things broke down for good. The usual routine, careful steps and whispered confidences among the book stacks, evaporated. People running back and forth, doors slamming, dogs sniffing. Letícia hugged a pile of old novels to her chest, as if that might protect someone, herself, maybe, or those women who pinned their hopes between the pages. In the cold hallway, Gabriel appeared. Gray suit, wearing that look of someone who feels nothing. But inside, he was trembling. His boss's phone pulsed nonstop in his pocket, muttering about damage control, resolve this, numbers, reports, losses. Still, he couldn't stop watching her. Letícia, weaving through the chaos, trying to cradle in her small arms everything she couldn't control. She went straight to a cell where the shouting was loudest. "Calm down. No one's going to take your things. Wait, listen. This will pass," she repeated, but the words just ricocheted off cold walls. So much tension, even breathing wasn't easy. Millions of questions with no answers, fear squelching into every corner. Gabriel hovered, watching. He tried to focus on his work, on rationality, but something felt off. No protocol prepared him for seeing someone so fragile and so resilient at once. That's when he noticed the way Letícia bit her lip, holding back tears in front of the women. How her fingers shook, straightening books at the counter, one by one, just to keep her hands busy and dodge the pain. Her stained blouse, her deep circles, sleepless nights sinking into her skin. Gabriel wanted to leave. None of this would come to anything, he told himself, just a bad day. But her gaze sought his for a moment, and in that look, she was screaming silently. "Are you just going to stand there?" Silence fell between them. Not the comfortable kind old friends share, but something uneasy, tense, packed with things neither dared admit aloud. Letícia turned her face away, wiped a stubborn tear quickly. No scene. She hated being seen like this, stripped of her strength. Why was it always him who caught her low points? The cell's women huddled in back, shielding letters, photos, scraps of childhood. One, still a girl in her eyes, sobbed quietly, and Letícia crouched beside, offering a shoulder with shy tenderness. Gabriel crossed his arms, stuck in a conflict. For the company, this was all risk, problems, stuff to wrap up quickly. But watching Letícia pull all that pain to herself, he felt a tightness in his throat. Something strange, unsettling, crept into his chest. Letícia struggled to steady her voice, but it sounded even weaker. "They aren't numbers," she whispered, looking at him as if that simple fact could shift the world. But Gabriel couldn't answer. He had no words that wouldn't give himself away. The silence only thickened, each trying to guess what the other thought, neither one brave enough to ask. Right then, the loudspeaker called Gabriel's name. He was supposed to lead the inspection, show impartiality. Letícia walked off down the hallway, feeling every step clamped like handcuffs. In the empty cafeteria, her mask finally slipped. She cried alone, in the corner against the cold wall. Tried to breathe deep so she wouldn't fall apart. Weak, she cursed herself. "I can't break down now." Gabriel walked in without knocking. Finding her crying, he stopped in the doorway, hesitating at the edge of an abyss. He didn't know whether to speak, to touch, to pretend not to see. What he wanted most was for Letícia to lift her head and tell him everything would pass, even if it was a lie. He crossed the cafeteria slowly, shoes echoing on the hard floor. He knelt beside her, carefully, so as not to startle. Letícia didn't look at him. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and hardened up again, like she'd done since childhood, since the world first got hard. Gabriel touched her shoulder lightly, just for a second. Enough for her to feel it. Enough for him to realize how huge a simple gesture could be when you're afraid. She pulled away, face set, silently begging him not to try to be kind. "You don't need to," she whispered. "I'm fine." Together there, they breathed in that suffocating silence. He felt the sting of her rejection, but couldn't pull back. It was impossible not to respect her, even at her most wounded. He wanted to explain, to apologize, to shout that they were on the same side, but words felt useless beside that bruised strength. Somewhere inside, doubt grew. How could anyone hold so much together without breaking? Letícia had never been able to trust, not even when everything screamed for help. So, even now, with Gabriel beside her, the world still echoed with loneliness. She looked around, noticing the chilled walls, the bars, the slow, dragging clock. Hard to remember that there was life outside those walls. "I know you want to help," she murmured, her voice hoarse with fatigue. "But nothing ever changes." It wasn't anger, just a tiredness as old as she was. Gabriel wanted to promise that things did change. But lying to her would be selfish. What remained between them, right there on the hard floor, was just truth. Two strangers trying to save themselves from their past. Maybe one day they'd grow into allies. Maybe they already were, if only they'd admit it. In the end, they stood up together, not as partners, more as survivors of the same wreck. Even in silence, the bond between them felt tougher than any victory or defeat. Night had swallowed almost everything by the time she showed up in the parking lot. The yellow lights played strangely off Gabriel's car, casting long shadows over the wet asphalt. There was no noise, just the distant sound of someone locking a gate, or maybe a dog barking in a neighbor's yard. She walked slowly, as if deciding whether to move forward or turn back. She carried a book, but she didn't seem in the mood to talk about stories tonight. No one paid them any mind. Just the wind, that kind of cold that makes you shrink inside your own silence. Gabriel pretended to fuss with his keys, but truth was, he didn't want to leave. He could still feel her crying from the other afternoon hanging on his skin, a thing that didn't wash off, even for a man used to never feeling much. When Letícia stopped beside him, it was clear she had something important to say. Her body was an open book, but with torn pages and some hidden in a pocket. She stood there for a few seconds without saying a word, just staring at the ground. Their silence was not empty. It was filled with bottled-up pain, the kind that builds up because dealing with it would hurt even more. She nervously traced her finger along the edge of a book, and Gabriel realized it was the same one he'd seen before on the prison shelves. "You know," she said, her eyes fixed ahead, her voice almost lost in the chill of the night. "There are some things we never fix. We just learn to let time bury them under dust." Gabriel didn't answer. He felt the weight of her words, but also the urge, almost automatic, to fix everything, as if every sentence she spoke was a contract with clauses and laws he was bound to resolve. But not this time. All he could do was wait for her to go on. When my brother died. Her voice was low but steady, as if she'd repeated those words to herself 100 times already. I thought the world was about justice. I thought someone would look at us and see who he was. It never happened. She bit her lip, tried to smile, but it didn't come. The light's reflection cast a sad gleam in her eyes, and he realized he'd never really noticed their color before. Gabriel wanted to ask her brother's name, wanted to say that sometimes justice doesn't make any sense. But he stayed quiet. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because silence was safer. Breaking it would be like shaking a glass box, one they'd both end up cut by. Letícia went on, clutching the book tighter against her chest. I come here, fall into this routine, thinking that with every book I lend out, maybe I can bring some small piece of him back into the world. But if I'm honest, what I really want is to feel like I still make some kind of difference, even if it's just for someone that nobody else ever sees. The wind picked up. Her hair flew loose for a second, and she tucked it behind her ear. Gabriel looked at her hand, so small and steady around that book, as if it were the last one left. He realized he'd never touched that hand, never noticed how much he wanted to. The thought came quick, tangled up in guilt and longing. There he was, a lawyer with a crooked tie, stubble on his chin, soul-tired. He wanted to tell her about his mother, about all the defeats in his own journey, but that would have been selfish. In that space between them, it was only about her. Her breathing seemed to echo in the silence of the parking lot. He wondered if anyone, watching from a distance, could see those two figures standing among cars and shadows, but nobody would ever know what was really happening there. The world never notices these small stories. I feel. Letícia paused, like the right word had slipped away. I feel like everyone's already given up fighting for what's right, you know? This city, the justice system, even you. Gabriel felt a strange tightening in his chest. He'd come ready to dismantle the prison and move on, chalking it up as just another line on his resume. But hearing her speak of her brother, of everything left unsaid, suddenly made it hard to hide behind legal briefs and files. It's not always easy to fight, was all he managed. She gave a sad smile. It wasn't mockery, a simple acknowledgement. And I know. In that moment, their eyes finally met for real. They'd argued before, faced each other across courtrooms and corridors, but this was different. In her gaze was an invitation, an unspoken question. Do you really hear me now? Or are you still standing on the other side? Gabriel didn't want to admit it, but yes, he was finally listening. Letícia reached out, placing her hand gently on his forearm. The touch was light, almost shy, but it ignited something inside Gabriel's chest. Small, but impossible to ignore. He fought not to react, but felt goosebumps rise beneath her fingers. Not from cold, not from heat, but something entirely different. In Gabriel's mind, everything blurred together. He remembered his father saying men must never get involved, must always keep their distance. But all he wanted now was an excuse not to leave. Their silence grew heavier, but not in a bad way. The silence of people who know nothing more needs to be said. Letícia lowered her eyes, let go of his arm softly. He saw she was trembling too, and it wasn't just from the cold. It was fear, of any step forward or back. They were trapped in that moment, each carrying a past that weighed heavily in opposite directions. There, beneath the weak parking lot light and the distant sound of the gate locking, Gabriel realized something inside him had changed. He no longer wanted to root for the downfall of this place. He thought of all she'd told him, and all he didn't have the courage to share himself. Gabriel opened his mouth to say something, but gave up halfway. It wasn't worth spoiling that instant just because he felt the need for words. Instead, he let his body turn, just slightly, toward hers, and they gave each other the kind of small, hesitant, but completely honest smile that says everything. Their silence said it all. Neither of them was strong enough to really walk away. They stayed like that, motionless, guarding that brief spark of courage to reach out to each other. For a few seconds, that was enough. When Letícia finally said goodbye, walking slowly toward the gate, Gabriel felt no urge to stop her. He knew that after that night, nothing would ever be the same. In the end, love doesn't begin with grand declarations. It starts with the right silence, and a touch truer than any verdict. It was almost midnight, but Gabriel was still there, locked in the papery prison and cold light of the makeshift office beside the penitentiary. Files piled high on the desk, higher. The more he spiraled inside his own head. None of it smelled new to him. The musty paper, the burnt coffee, the rain slipping past the pane. But now, everything felt heavier. The name Maria Alves jumped off the pages. Leticia's mother. He rubbed his hands over his face, feeling the rough stubble. Closed his eyes, trying to push away an obvious truth he could no longer ignore. Since that night in the parking lot, Leticia's eyes shimmering with confession, her timid touch on his hand, Gabriel had suspected there was something she hadn't said. But now it was more than suspicion. It was all there, black and white, as real and harsh as concrete. His mind was a kind of lit boxing ring. On one side, the relentless attorney he'd always been. On the other, the man stunned by a heart pounding far beyond reason. Leticia, with her silent strength, with the habit of speaking with her eyes while hiding the rest, had become a riddle tinged with pain. Betrayal, the word came fast and fierce. Only, it didn't feel right. It felt more like sadness. He tried to focus on the documents, ran his hand over them, but the letters danced and blurred. Beneath it all, the silence screamed. And in that silence, every question grew immense. Did she trust him? Were her recent confessions even real? Or was it all still just some desperate defense, some plan? Time stretched thin as a wire about to snap. Gabriel heard the chair creak, felt the weight of the old building, the ticking clock on the wall, the distant drumming of rain. The world seemed suspended between 2 seconds, before and after the discovery. He suddenly craved a cigarette. He hadn't smoked in years. He laughed alone. The cold was his only companion. He grabbed his jacket, not to put it on, just to press it against his chest, as if he needed some extra weight. The tightness grew. He felt anger. Why hadn't she told him? Why trust him so little? But the next thought crept in, a dirty whisper. Because you were never really trustworthy, Gabriel. No one trusts a shark in a suit. He caught his own distorted reflection in the window, tired, hollow-eyed, pale in the artificial light, like a judge on the day of his own sentencing. When he left, the corridor was dark and damp. All the voices slept, except his own. Now, silence was something else, the muffled noise of things you can't explode, can't swallow. Every footstep echoed, every breath forced. He thought of Leticia, probably still awake somewhere in that cramped building, storing up every fragment of the day to finally let go, into poetry or tears. In the parking lot, he stood under the thin rain, not heavy, but enough to seep through his shirt, as if in warning. There he stood, unable to decide whether to call her or simply disappear. It was easy to walk away, or that's what people expected of him. But the memory of her telling him about her brother, the way she bit her lip before touching his hand, wouldn't leave his mind. Leticia, at that moment, felt the emptiness in the prison library. The books were still stacked, but the warmth she felt in the afternoons was gone. The silence was different today. No longer a refuge, but a threat. She tidied and untidied the bookshelves, just to keep her hands busy, so her heart wouldn't unravel. Anxiety was an old visitor, but now it had a name and a face. Gabriel. Did he know? Had she let too much slip out? She found herself glancing at the door, half hoping to hear familiar footsteps, but knew it was pointless. The air was just too heavy, her throat too dry. She wanted to write a letter she'd never send, just to ask forgiveness for the silence. But she had no words, only exhaustion, and the fear of losing even the few certainties left. Back in her tiny room, she sat on the edge of the bed, fingers gripping the necklace she'd worn since childhood. She missed her brother, a kind of innocence she'd never get back. Her thoughts hovered over her mother, so close and yet so far. Sometimes she thought maybe she too deserved those invisible bars. Meanwhile, Gabriel sat in his car, parked and unmoving. He didn't have the strength to turn the key and go back to the hotel. He let his head fall against the steering wheel. The glass began to fog. The silence was so heavy it was as if the world itself was screaming. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but to whom? There was no hard, confident lawyer left. Only a man desperate to know where he had begun to lose control. He pictured Leticia entering the prison quietly, her eyes red, always hiding a storm inside. You should have told me, he thought. But deep down, he knew he'd never told her anything. Not about his own fear of failing. Not about that loneliness he'd carried since boyhood, since his father used to shout, "Men don't cry." The rain grew heavier. He breathed deep, the smell of wet earth and relief filling his lungs. He looked at his phone, thought about typing a message. His finger hovered over her name. He erased it all. This kind of silence spoke more than any truth. That night, no answers came. Only the certainty that the secret changed everything. And Gabriel knew, from then on, there would be no easy road for him. He could walk away, from Letícia, from the truth, from himself. Or do something he'd never done, risk trusting, even if it meant losing everything. And it was there, between the rain and his thoughts, that Gabriel understood the emptiness that only silence can create. The office felt colder than usual that evening. The light slanting through the blinds was gray, tilted, less golden than it looked from outside. Gabriel straightened his tie, though nobody cared at that hour, and fixed his eyes on a random crack in the wall, where a line split the plaster. The open case lay scattered on his desk. File: Maria de Pena Alves. Crime: confessed homicide. But now the name buzzed in his head. Maria Alves. Alves, just like Letícia. He already knew. The documents, the dates, it all lined up. And in that moment, clutching the folder tight, he felt a weight in his chest, a mix of anger, disappointment, and a desperate wish to go back a week and never have gotten involved at all. He remembered her face. Those bright eyes, always curious, always hiding some grief he couldn't reach. He remembered how she arranged the books, wiped worn covers with her sleeve, smiled at every woman who asked for a new story. How tough she could be, and yet so quiet in her pain. Almost without meaning to, Gabriel looked at his colleagues in the office, laughing at some dumb background joke, talking football. He didn't feel like laughing. He just wanted to fix this, to know what was right, and why everything felt so wrong. He'd learned that ethics were the bedrock, that you couldn't let feelings interfere. The rules were clear, cold. But there, scribbling in the margins of the report, all he wanted was to ask, what if the rule really hurts somebody? What if doing what's right means betraying someone you care about? He thought about calling Camila, the most senior colleague, the only one who seemed to see beyond the rulebook. But he dropped the idea. The words wouldn't come. It was just too personal, too messy. Almost 6 on the clock. The shift dragged on, refusing to end. He decided to leave before anyone noticed how shaken he really was. Outside, the smell of rain and people going home. Trees swayed gently in the wind, leaves falling like broken promises. By some impulse, Gabriel walked to the little square near the prison. He knew Letícia often passed through there before heading home. He'd seen her sitting on the bench, surrounded by books and silences. The kind of silence that's harder to take than any noise. She was there, as if she'd been expecting him. She held a closed book in her lap, eyes focused somewhere beyond the gate. Her hair hung loose. She looked so small against the vastness of the early evening, yet somehow she filled the whole scene. Peace and guilt, sitting side by side. Gabriel stopped a few steps away. He wished she'd look up, say something. But Letícia remained quiet, guarded, maybe, or just too tired to fake surprise. He didn't know how to begin. He drew a breath, felt the knot in his throat, the chill in his stomach. Why didn't you ever tell me? It came out almost sharp, but it was all he could manage. The tone was harsh, because he had no idea how else to be soft. Letícia clutched the book tighter, but didn't look away. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. Just the look of someone who's said goodbye to tears too many times. You never asked, she said softly. No accusation, no drama. Just the fact, like a shirt that hurts to put on, but you have no choice but wear. The silence thickened. All you could hear was the distant hum of cars, a stray bird. He sat next to her, not too close. Between them, a strange space, a distance built out of fear, and every word left unsaid until now. You? Hiding this? Don't you know the risk? I could hurt you. It's not just about your mother, Letícia. There are other people involved. I need to know how far this goes. She closed her eyes before replying. Her fingers shook. It's not just about her. It's my brother, too. Gabriel, he died for something he didn't do. My mother was locked up to protect him. I was left alone. Only the books were left. They're all that kept me alive in here. His anger started to melt, replaced by a deep sadness, a longing for a time he never even knew. Do you really trust me? He asked, voice low. For the first time, he felt real fear, that he wouldn't be enough, that one wrong move would break her. Letícia looked at the sky for a moment, searching the dark clouds for courage. Then, she turned to him, meeting his gaze. I do. But I was afraid. You always seemed so, on the other side. I thought you'd never understand. His heart was pounding wild and offbeat, like a kid waiting for bad news. He ran a hand through his hair, fumbling for composure. I don't know what to do now, he almost whispered. If I tell the truth, I destroy you. If I stay silent, I kill everything I ever stood for. Letícia breathed deep for the first time in minutes, as if even the air carried a spark of hope. I don't want you to lie. I don't want to be your secret. I just wanted justice, but it's been so long I stopped believing in it. The wind picked up, colder now. They sat there, unmoving, feeling maybe they'd never been so close, nor so far. The glances they traded were full of fear, guilt, a hope to salvage something from all that could still be born between them. He extended his hand, slowly, not quite touching. Her presence was almost a silent cry for help. In the end, no one said another word. They stayed together, no promises, just feeling. And in that heavy silence, in the space between words, Gabriel understood. Life can turn upside down in a minute, as long as there's someone willing to stay, even when the truth hurts. There, on that cold park bench, it felt like everything depended on what came next. Would they keep going, each crushed by their own burdens, or risk trusting, and try somehow to mend what the world had broken? The sun was gone, but the night, for the first time in a long while, seemed to bring some chance, maybe even a new beginning. No one ever warns you that an alliance can be a burden too, a risk, a leap in the dark. Gabriel realized this the first night he truly decided to help Letícia. It wasn't heroic, not grand, just a moment of exhaustion, when he pushed away the files, stared at nothing, and thought, what if I did things differently? His phone buzzed. No pleasantries, no chit-chat, just a file and a please, I need you to look at this. Letícia. Her face came to mind, not smiling, but serious, waiting for an answer, maybe for support. Gabriel sighed and left the office, feeling the damp, early evening cold stick to his skin. The city square was nearly empty. An old man, hardly shielded by his coat, fed pigeons. Some kids laughed loud on a bench in back. And Letícia, at the far end, clutched a folder stuffed with papers, as if her whole world fit inside. Neither knew how to greet the other now. They were no longer just adversaries, but they didn't quite know how to be allies either. He approached slowly, hands in his pockets, his awkwardness almost painful. She looked up, eyes marked with fatigue, but still shining in a way he only ever saw in her, even when everything else seemed impossible. Silence got there first, but it wasn't hostile. It was almost shy, the kind of silence that seems to ask permission. Gabriel opened the folder carefully, avoiding Leticia's eyes for the first few seconds. Pages filled with handwritten notes, lines of pen that trembled. He wondered how many sleepless nights she'd spent there, alone, untangling a story full of knots and lies. She explained in a soft voice, just the essentials, as if every word carried its own weight. This here, the witness lied back then. And this, it's the letter I found between the books. He listened to everything, but also felt more. The tremor in her voice, the long pause before each phrase, an old fear of being dismissed, not being enough. Each time she reached for a page, her hand brushed his lightly. They didn't notice on purpose, but neither did they pull away. The touch was fleeting, forgotten in seconds, but each time it seemed to say, are we really doing this together? The wind brought the smell of wet earth, with a hint of far-off smoke. Gabriel felt the cold in his bones, but didn't think of leaving. He wanted to hear it all, or needed to, though he didn't know why. When she looked him deep in the eyes, there was no escape. No accusation, no plea, just a tired, clear truth. Are you really going to do this with me? She asked, not raising her voice, but like someone asking for a miracle. Gabriel hesitated. The lawyer in him screamed every risk, career, reputation, even the possibility of drawing the anger of this small town. But he stayed. I am. He didn't have to explain why. The days that followed were anything but heroic. They hunted for evidence. They spoke in hushed voices, almost whispers, like strangers inside their own lives. Sometimes they walked side by side, Letícia chattering through legal details to keep her mind off the stairs. Other times, distant, each lost in thought. Gabriel, reviewing old verdicts, wondering when he last slept without fearing for his future. Letícia, jotting names and dates, mapping connections, hoping for the crack in the wall that would free her mother. The town, once indifferent, had changed. Doors that had never exactly been open now closed outright. In the market, old ladies whispered and turned away. At the bakery, the baker handed back change without meeting his eyes. The outside silence was heavy, different from the one they held between them. This one brimmed with anger, prejudice, fear. At home, Gabriel stared at his reflection, tried to recognize the man there. Always so rational, so detached. Now lost. Messages from Letícia, in the middle of the night, described yet another setback, another veiled threat. She always ended with, "I'm sorry for dragging you into this." He never knew how to reply. He just felt. One night, they met again, on the rooftop of an old building, where almost nobody passed by. They sat on the cold concrete, silent, hands tucked between their knees. The city stretched out below, lights fighting and failing to banish the darkness. Letícia looked up at the sky and breathed deep. Gabriel noticed her fingers were shaking, not from cold, but from accumulated fatigue. He wanted to hold her hand, wanted to say he was afraid too, just as lost as she was. But he stayed silent. All that was left between them was a look full of questions. What if it doesn't work? What if we lose everything? The silence offered only one answer: together or not at all. Letícia cried softly that night. Not the loud, desperate sobs, but the quiet kind, as if she'd reached her limit, but kept going anyway. Gabriel watched, awkward, waiting for her to let him come closer. When she rested her head on his shoulder, it was as if all the weight split in two, suddenly lighter. In that moment, hope was back. Small, almost shy, but enough for another day. The next day, they got word the judge would reopen the case. The battle was only beginning, but as Letícia told Gabriel the news, her smile was like sunlight breaking through the fog that still wanted to smother everything. He wanted to smile too, but only managed a weary sigh. The town stayed hostile, but in the middle of the square, there were now two unlikely allies. No longer just lawyer and librarian. More than anything, they were two survivors, learning to trust each other, and maybe, someday, the world again. It was in the small details, a brush of hands, a shared silence, an honest glance, that Gabriel realized. Some alliances seem impossible until it hurts not to have them. The courthouse was colder than usual. The air inside was so heavy you could almost feel it pressing into your bones. Outside, a light rain drummed on the tall windows, drawing shifting shadows on the old tile floor. But no one seemed to notice the weather or the world outside. The whole town was crowded inside, jammed on hard benches, eyes hungry for a conclusion, for some kind of reckoning. Every breath seemed like it waited for a scandal, a new reason to judge. Letícia sat in one of the front benches, hands clenched tight in her lap. She was trembling, and not just from the cold. Her gaze didn't flinch, even when everything hurt. You could see it in how she held herself. Courage dressed as silence, worry disguised as calm. Her eyes flicked from Gabriel's tense arm to her mother's serious face, to the same worn walls she'd always known. Her heart was pounding so hard it must have wanted to scream. When they called her, Letícia stood and walked slowly to the front, every step echoing heavy on the floor. There was no one there to give her strength. Only herself, exposed and alone, once again. All eyes pinned her, dissecting every gesture, every word, looking for the slightest crack. Before she began to speak, she glanced to the side, just for a second. Gabriel's eyes were already there, calm but roiling underneath, like the ocean on a windy day. He was no longer that perfectly pressed lawyer. He had dark circles under his eyes, a tense jaw, his tie a little crooked. But his eyes, they were almost an apology, tangled up with pride, as if he was saying, without sound, that he was really there with her. Letícia told the story in a simple way, like someone sharing a pain that's been hidden for years. She spoke of her brother, their hard childhood, the day everything fell apart. With each sentence, her voice grew thinner. Nobody interrupted. Some held their breath, waiting for her to falter, but Letícia went all the way, letting silence fill the places that words couldn't reach. At one point, she almost broke down. Her eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. And there, between questions, Letícia remembered a long-ago evening, when her brother still smiled, and her mother baked cornbread to try to fool the sadness. In that memory, Letícia found the strength to keep going, even when it felt like she might shatter. When she finished, the judge waited a moment before thanking her, as if everyone needed to learn to respect what had just happened. Only later did she notice her hands were still shaking, and that Gabriel, though far away, had been breathing in sync with her, as if bound by an invisible pact. Then it was his turn. Gabriel stood, straightened his suit jacket, but didn't smile. His hair was wet from the rain, his face lined with sleepless nights. He looked at Letícia before he spoke, just for a second. And then he began, in a way he never had before. This wasn't about laws or profit anymore. It was about people, about guilt, forgiveness, loss, about everything no one else dares to say. Gabriel laid out evidence, questioned witnesses, unraveled lies the whole town had taken as timeless truths. But even as logic threatened to take over, it was Leticia's eyes that he searched for direction. In the pauses between questions, as he flipped through pages, you could see when he doubted himself. What does she want from me? Does she believe in me? The tension mounted with each hostile answer, each hard stare from the prosecutor, each whisper from the last row. In the middle of this orchestrated chaos, Letícia noticed something simple. Gabriel always held a crumpled piece of paper between his fingers. Maybe an old note, maybe a message scribbled in haste. Something small, but he squeezed it constantly, as if it were an anchor. Everything changed when Leticia's mother was called. She entered slowly, unsteady, like someone carrying too many years. Her face bore the marks of prison, of a life worn down. But her eyes, they shone with tenderness and sadness, the kind of gaze only someone who has lost everything can still carry. Letícia felt the floor quake. Her mother hesitated, paused halfway down the aisle, and then, gently, sought her daughter's eyes. In that look, a whole world of conversation passed without a single word. When the prosecutor asked if she wanted to say anything, her voice trembled. She hesitated, swallowed hard, and then started to speak. But not like any ordinary confession. It was a last attempt to protect those you love. She confessed to the crime, described the desperation of those dark days, and then the heaviest silence in the world fell over the room. Everyone seemed to know that was only half the story, that the truth was bigger and more painful. Letícia bit her lip almost to the point of pain. Next to her, Gabriel closed his eyes for a moment, his jaw clenched. It felt like their hearts were being split open there, in front of everyone. At the height of the confession, when Leticia's mother finally told everything, truly everything, the whole room held its breath. For a moment, no one dared move. Only Letícia and Gabriel looked at each other in silence. No one really saw what happened, but it was as if one was the other's breath. He wanted to run to her, to hug her, to ask forgiveness for ever doubting. But he stayed still. It was fear, it was love, it was everything at once, and neither of them knew how to explain. Her mother finished speaking, and the room erupted in a hushed murmur, like rain about to fall. But Letícia heard nothing. Only the thudding of her own heart and Gabriel's gaze, intense and vulnerable, crossing over to hers through the emptiness. It was as if everything they'd never said was wrapped up in that single look. In that moment, the town, the courtroom, the past didn't matter. Only the silence. And in that silence, there was an unspoken promise. The hallway outside the courtroom was empty, but echoes lingered, the hurried footsteps, harsh words, the screech of wooden benches being dragged. The smell of cold coffee and damp paper hung in the air. Outside, the rain kept falling, beating at the windows as if trying to get in and wash away all the tension left behind. Letícia leaned against the cold wall. She closed her eyes for a second, just to feel the silence. The tears still threatened, but she no longer knew if it was sadness, relief, or sheer exhaustion. Everything felt heavy, the body, her chest, even her hands. Only time seemed not to move. When she opened her eyes, Gabriel was standing at the other end of the corridor. His suit was askew, his tie loose, his gaze lost. That invincible lawyer's posture was gone. You could see that he felt the weight of everything. What he'd said, what he hadn't, the choices now set in stone. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her in a way that hurt and healed at the same time. There was an apology in his eyes, but also a tired hope. From a distance, you could see he was trembling slightly. Maybe from the cold, Maybe from the fear of showing himself fragile after fighting so long to be strong. In that quiet, Letícia took a deep breath. His scent mixed with hers as he drew near, slowly, as if any sudden movement might break what remained between them. It was a hug that didn't ask permission, it just happened. They fit together in the most awkward way possible, and it was perfect like that. She felt the cold sweat of his hand trace gently along her back, a hesitation that turned into care. The walls of the courthouse no longer mattered. No one watching, no one judging. Just the two of them, pressed close, breathing mixed. Against her ear, the sound of his heart seemed to shatter all those lifetime walls of silence he'd built. Letícia couldn't remember the last time anyone had held her like that, for real, without hurry, without roles or masks. She felt his head rest on her shoulder and heard when he whispered, not yet brave enough to say it out loud. "I don't want to leave." His voice was hoarse, broken with fatigue and fear of confessing what he felt. She closed her eyes again, because she knew if she looked at him, she might lose herself. And for the first time, that didn't scare her. Maybe that was the secret, not protecting yourself so much. Because right there, under that cold corridor light, the whole world felt small. There was only that embrace, that instant of truth. Inside, she heard all the words she wanted to say, but always thought too big for her voice. "I don't want to either," she thought. But she just stayed there, her face buried in his shirt, smelling the rain he had brought in with him. Her lipstick smeared, her eyes burning, and a shy kind of freedom blooming inside. When Gabriel pulled back and looked at her, the world stopped. He gently passed a thumb by her mouth, wiping away a tear she hadn't even noticed. It wasn't some soap opera romantic move. It was a silent apology for the past, for all the barriers, for everything they might have been if they hadn't been so trapped by their own fears. She found herself smiling, foolish and relieved. It was hard to feel light, but in that instant, it was easy to laugh quietly, just for him to hear. "Are you really going to give everything up?" she murmured, afraid of the answer and whatever might follow. The way he looked at her left no doubts. "I already have," he said, almost voiceless, because his words carried everything he'd never said to anyone. Right there, in that cold corridor, Gabriel seemed finally free, and so was she. They were no longer lawyer and witness, accuser and defender, city and country. Just two survivors trying to learn how to breathe again. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It didn't hurt. It was a comfortable pause, a space where their dreams could, for the first time, exist together. Letícia felt her heart race, not from fear, but hope. The future, always so distant, suddenly seemed near. For the first time in her life, she let herself imagine, what if? He took her hand, and even there, in front of iron doors and silent signs, everything became easier. His hand was big, warm, but shook as much as hers. Their fingers tangled together, awkward. That was all. Nothing else needed to be said. While outside the rain turned into a storm, they lingered, in no hurry to leave. The corridor's chill vanished, as if an invisible blanket had formed in the space between them. Sometimes, their eyes met again. Those exchanges were gentle and anxious, as if trading promises without noise, without any more secrets. Letícia realized that, just then, every reason she'd ever had to run away faded. Her brother's grief, her mother's shame, a whole city's eyes. None of it was bigger than what she felt now. And Gabriel, who never believed in second chances, felt everything he'd bottled up swept away by a current of feeling he could no longer suppress. Between tears, quiet laughs, and tangled fingers, Letícia and Gabriel chose, right then, to write a new story. No bars, no silence. Something real. Because in that empty courthouse hallway, love was the only thing that could set them both free from everything. I remember that day as if time really did stop, the way you always wish it could in important moments, but almost never does. The sun shone shyly, between clouds, as if it too were waiting to see how things would turn out. It wasn't hot nor cold, just an ordinary spring day. But to us, it felt like the world beginning again. The news of the acquittal came quietly. No fireworks, no applause. Just a different kind of silence, one made of relief, sweeping through the courthouse walls. Letícia heard the judge, but it was as though she heard nothing, her eyes fixed on a spot above his head, as if trying to hold back a wave. Her face was pale, even more so after so many sleepless nights. I saw what that meant. She didn't want to cry in front of everyone, but her whole body was shaking. Letitia's mother stood frozen for 4 seconds before bringing her hand to her mouth. I'll never forget the power in that gesture. A mother drawing breath as if learning to breathe again. What no one saw was that Letitia wanted to run and hug her mother. She froze. She looked at me first, as if asking permission for that happiness. Our eyes met, and, in that second, I felt a lump in my throat. I knew I'd choose 1,000 times over to see that joy in her, no matter the cost. The news spread through the town before we could even leave the courthouse. A murmur, curious glances outside, but we didn't see anyone else. I only saw her. Letitia stopped in the corridor, leaned against the wall. Red eyes, a restrained smile. She let out a sigh like someone releasing a weight carried for years. All I wanted was to reach for her hand, but I didn't know if it was the right time. Funny how it is. Sometimes feelings shout, but the body hesitates, afraid to disturb the quiet beauty of the scene. She took the first step, touched my fingers softly, just to confirm I was really there. In that silent touch was a request. Stay with me, just a little longer in this good kind of quiet. Her mother, now free, hugged Letitia. And in that embrace, there was a story no one else could understand. A story made of pain and impossible choices, of love hidden behind bars. When they parted, Letitia pressed her forehead to her mother's. Now we can start again. Her voice came out low, shaky. Her mother smiled, and her eyes held no guilt anymore, only gratitude. At the end of the hallway, I looked back. The old prison warden stood scratching his chin, as if expecting me to say something official. I only nodded, a farewell without the courage for words. I wasn't going to demolish anything, neither the concrete walls nor the invisible ones. The project would stay on paper. For the first time in my life, I understood that not everything comes down to projects or contracts. Outside, the scent of jacaranda filled the air. The courthouse gate, usually just a place you pass through quickly, had become a symbol. Letitia and I walked through those gates side by side, but not in a hurry this time. This time it was different. It was shared freedom, no rush, no fear of who might see. The wind tugged at her hair, and she didn't even bother to fix it. Her shoulders, usually hunched, were loose. She wasn't afraid to be seen happy anymore. We stopped on the sidewalk for a moment, unsure what to do next. The world outside seemed so big. I felt I should say something, but words ran away. Letitia looked at me. That look of hers always full of questions, but now, finally, it was just calm. And it was that calm that undid me most inside. Because her life had never been peaceful, but in that instant, it felt like, even if chaos returned, we'd never walk alone again. And now, she whispered, almost like a lost little girl in the park, only now with a smile. I didn't have an answer ready. I never did. Now, everything's new, I managed. She laughed that quiet laugh, the prettiest sound I've ever heard, and rested her head on my shoulder. We started to walk with no particular direction, feeling like any path would do. Each step was a cut from the past, a silent agreement. Never live a lie again, never hide a wound again. She told me about her fear of falling asleep and never waking up from this dream. I told her about my terror of feeling and losing it all again. She squeezed my hand, tight, as if to say she was afraid too, but she'd stay. The silence between us grew comfortable, the kind that doesn't need to be explained. People watched as we passed, some smiling to themselves, others pretending not to see. It didn't matter. For the first time, we belonged more to our own world than to that town full of old stories. Letitia's mother walked a few steps behind. She looked at the trees, the sky, filled with a peace I'd forgotten could exist. Seeing that, I knew everything would be okay, that the future really could be lighter. It didn't have to be perfect, just true. Near the small square, Letitia stopped and looked at me. Her eyes sparkled, not with tears, but with hope. In that moment, I understood. She didn't want to start over alone. And I never wanted to lose another chance to dive into this love with nowhere left to hide. On the old park bench, we sat side by side. The sky slowly darkened. Letitia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. And I promised myself never to let silence become distance again. We were two messes, two survivors, ready at last to create a new story. And the most beautiful thing of all, out there, beyond the walls, it was there that we discovered where true freedom begins. It's when you choose to stay and start over, without fear, alongside someone who understands even the secrets you never spoke aloud.